IVM.
Hey everybody, welcome to another week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you are not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. As we head into week 4 of lockdown, we're doing our best to make sure that we maintain our schedules and try and get you as many of the podcasts that you're used to listening as we possibly can, but beg your indulgence if there are any slippages in schedules and times. With that, let's just get on with your show.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. India has been locked down since late March, nearly a month now. It's one among many countries that have imposed lockdowns to reduce the burden on their healthcare systems as they battle the spread of the COVID-19 virus. But India is different in a lot of ways. It's got a much larger population, it's got very dense urban areas, and most importantly, it's got a lot of people in the informal sector who've been badly affected by the loss of livelihoods because of the lockdown. There's a lot of discussion across the world on how to manage a lockdown so countries can trade off both the public health implications and the economic costs. Here at Takshashila, we came up with an idea as to how India can do this. Joining me today are Takshashila Director Nitin Pai and Dr. Shambhavi Nayak. Hi guys.
Yeah, Nirup.
So over to you, Nitin. Tell us a little bit about our overall strategy. One of the key mechanisms we're proposing is calibrated reopening, right? So can you tell us a bit about how that might work?
See, I think the big, broad idea is that we should continue with our economic life in the shadow of the pandemic. The pandemic is going to be here with us for the next year or two until the vaccine is found or people acquire adequate immunity, which means that the business of a lockdown and relaxation is going to continue for a period of time. This is not going to be the first lockdown. We're most likely going to have subsequent lockdowns as other countries are discovering at this time. So the question is, how do you evolve a way of living? How do you evolve a way of getting on with life even in the shadow of the pandemic? So that's the motivating concern in this. Because a lot of our current conversation has been that, there is this month-long lockdown. What happens later? Are we going to lift it or are we going to continue? That's part of the answer. But the broader question is, if this is going to continue for 2 years, what do we do? How do we operate? So what we thought is that, first of all, we've got to be very, very concerned about the people whose lives are extremely vulnerable to lockdowns and to the coronavirus. So protecting lives and livelihoods is extremely important. Getting the economic activity going is, a corollary to this. And over a longer term, how do you reconstruct the economy which has taken such a beating in the shadow of the pandemic? So the way to do this is to look at India at a very, very granular level. Right? A district is probably the smallest local administration that we can think of, but there are even smaller administrative units like gram panchayats or municipalities or even wards and sub-wards in municipalities. So if we have the administrative capacity to look at a small granular level, we should be looking at that small granular level and making decisions thereby. So for example, if there is a small municipal ward in the city of Indore, where there is an outbreak, can we isolate the ward? Can we isolate our policy thinking to that ward and allow the rest of the country to get on with life to the extent that it's possible in the light of the pandemic? It doesn't mean that the rest of the country can drop its guard, but get on with life with sufficient amount of care and caution. So we said, why don't we color code localities? We've proposed a broader color code, which is 3 levels of red, there's an orange, there's a yellow, and then there's a green. Now, depending on how serious the outbreak is, you fall into one of these categories, right? At this point in time, I don't think there is any place in the country or the world which can be considered green, right? So yellow is probably, live with caution kind of a thing. So yellow is probably the best you're going to get at this point in time. And from yellow all the way to the highest level of red are a series of graduated phases of the outbreak. Now, depending on where your locality is at a particular time and the projection of where it's likely to be in the next couple of weeks or a month, you decide on the appropriate control measure. So you can ratchet up the controls if you feel that the outbreak is going to get worse, which means that you will tune up the lockdown, you will impose more control, you will do containment, you will block traffic, you will block interstate or inter-locality movement and intra-locality movement if you feel that things are getting worse. And if you feel that things are going to get better and are better with abundance of caution, you can relax the controls in terms of allowing greater amount of economic activity, etc., to take place with high levels of caution and safety. I must state what these high levels of caution and safety are. Wearing of masks, practicing social distancing, hand hygiene, and contact tracing are the sine qua non of this. You have to do this for a long period of time. So there's no getting away from that fact. The other abundance of caution is you restrict activities based on the risk profile. So a meeting room with 30 people is more likely to spread the virus than, let's say, a single shop where each customer comes every 5 minutes and there's no interaction between customers. So depending on that, you can decide which one to relax and which one to tighten.
So when we look at activity levels and we say that, okay, you have to go from one zone to the other, what kind of indicators are we looking at? And I think one of the concerns that everyone has is that we are not testing enough. So we might not always know what groups we fall into. Are there broader indicators that we could use?
Yeah, see, I think in our own group, what we decided is that one indicator is too little. So we need to have a overall sense of a few indicators. Look at it as, let's say, you're flying a plane, and there are several indicators which tells you, how well you're doing, what is your altitude, is your engine vibrating, is it heating up, various factors come in, right? So similarly, if you have a dashboard of, let's say, a few indicators, you can make your decision on changing the alert level based on what these indicators tell you. Now, we picked 5. One indicator would be the total number of positive cases in the last few days, the number of cases that are rising, that is the first derivative, how fast the cases are rising, are there new clusters, and so on. So these would form the basis of a set of indicators which you think are important. Now, interestingly, I think it is important to allow the state governments and district administration some amount of leeway in deciding what is red, what is yellow, and what risk they face, because the same set of indicators might not operate across the board, across the country. So as long as the district administration and the officials are sensitized to the principle behind this, the deciding how to tighten and how to loosen should largely be a decision based on the judgment of trained and sensitized local administrators.
Right, so we're seeing actually currently this whole debate over Georgia removing parts of its lockdown, right, in the US, when its cases are still rising. And obviously the trade-off now is between whether you have enough healthcare capacity to look after those rising cases versus the economic downturns of having a lockdown. So what you're saying is that we should let the state decide, and that the critical factor is going to be the healthcare burden that removing the lockdown can actually bring upon the state.
Absolutely, because baseline healthcare capacity tells you of the risk profile, right? So let's say you just have 1,000 ICU beds, and you expect the number of cases that require ICUs to be 1,000 within a week. Then absolutely, you are in the red zone, right? But if you have 1,000 beds and you don't expect the 1,000 beds to be occupied in the next 4 to 5 months, based on the current rate of growth, right? If you project it over a period of time, then you are reasonably sure that you're in orange or in yellow. You know that you don't have that much of a risk coming towards you. So hospital capacity, healthcare capacity is your baseline on which you will construct the whole risk profile.
Right. And as you now move through these threats, so once you have assessed the threat levels and you say, okay, I fall into this group and I foresee myself moving out, obviously you shouldn't be then reopening everything simultaneously, because that can just cause a sudden increase on the healthcare burden. So what kind of activities do you think should be allowed? What kind of considerations should states make when they go into this gradual lockdown?
Yeah, see, the challenge is to balance the risk of an outbreak versus economic activity, right? So when we decide what you want to do, you've got to do a 2 by 2 matrix and say that, look, what is high risk? Obviously, we shouldn't be doing it. What is moderate risk but gives us a fairly high amount of economic output? Then we should be doing that, right? And what is low risk and helps a lot of people? Obviously, we should be doing that. So I think it's not a list of things which somebody from New Delhi can dictate, but it is a very contextual judgment which local authorities, either at the district or a state level, should be making. Because the risk of the one size fits all approach is that something which might be extremely risky in one part of the country might not be extremely risky in another part of the country, which means that the other part of the country where it's not risky is suffering an economic burden which it need not, right? We should be making necessary sacrifices, but we should not be making unnecessary sacrifices. So the whole idea of prioritizing based on risk at a very local, granular level is to prevent or avoid the need to make unnecessary sacrifices. So clearly there are things which we can, from basic modeling, we can figure out which are goes and no-goes. Large religious gatherings, for example, there are certainly no-goes, right? You don't really need to have a large religious gathering for any form of economic activity or economic growth or sustenance. I mean, there are people who benefit from large economic activities, but it's not an ongoing livelihood-related issue. So you can avoid large religious gatherings. But you could have small shops which sell electronic goods, for example, your neighborhood shops which sell electronic goods, where you impose social distancing, masking, and hand hygiene. You will be able to manage the amount of risk which comes from it. So you will want to allow small shops, provided they do hand hygiene, social distancing, and control, which I think a lot of people will do because it's in their best interest. I've seen pharmacies in my neighborhood put a red tape about 1.5 meters from the normal shop to prevent people coming too close to the pharmacist. And then they say, instead of a credit card, why don't you use Google Pay or the UPI, which is a contactless payment system, right? So if we do things like that, those certainly take place. The risks do exist, but they can be managed. But at the same time, we shouldn't be doing extremely dangerous things like large gatherings, opening up movie theaters or rock concerts or things like that, right? So then there are a whole set of things in the middle. Now, those would be the most challenging ones because you need a very thoughtful, discriminating way to allow some of these activities. For example, the recent guidelines have said that X percentage of software companies can open, like 50% or 33%, whatever that number might be. That's a nice number because it gets you a feeling that this is okay because 50% or 30% gives you a sense of safety. But what really matters is not the percentage, but the social distancing that is possible within the office. So if you have a small cramped office where you had cramped 50 people and now there are 25 people in half cramped conditions, it is still a risk. Or even if you do 30% and it's still cramped, it is still a risk. So it's not the percentage of people who turn up for work, but what is the social distance and the physical distance between them. So some offices probably can say that, if it's cubicle land, you can say that you leave 2 cubicles in either direction, in all directions between people, right? So that's a space of about 3 meters with physical barriers in between. Probably that is a safe kind of a working setup. But if it is 50% strength, but people within 3 feet of each other, then you have a problem. So it is highly contextual, and I think it's very dangerous to have a one-size-fits-all rule, which is currently what we are trying to do with the relaxation of the lockdown. We need to go to a far more discriminating, a far more contextual, a far more principle-based approach rather than a rules-based approach.
Right. So what you kind of, I guess, was trying to say is we should look at the risk of social distancing failure, and the higher the risk, the lesser we should actually be doing those activities. But when we start thinking about opening offices, one of the things that we obviously might have to also restart is public transport. And I remember when Maharashtra, in its early days of going before the lockdown, Uddhav Thackeray used to come, the CM used to come on TV and beg people not to use the suburban railway station. the railway network, because he kept on saying that it is very overcrowded, we'll have to stop it, and that will just basically shut the city down. But obviously people would not listen, and it kept on getting overcrowded. How does public transport figure into it? I mean, there are some of these utilities which have to run if we want at least even a part of the city to start. How do we look at restarting public transport?
See, any economic activity, whether it is offices, factories, retail, public transport movement, has to tie in with an overall test, trace, isolate strategy, right? So when we get people to go to offices, we know that these people are most likely to be spreading the virus. So we should increase testing of people who are now turning up for work. Even now, for example, supermarket cashiers, police personnel, cleaning personnel, all the people who are currently working need to be tested, right? So these are the marginal spreaders which we need to be focusing our testing on. Similarly, if we open up public transport, we should be able to have a test, trace, isolate strategy around public transport. Now, it's going to be much harder for us to open up public transport in the Indian context because of the high levels of crowding, but it's possible, right? So let's look at it as a typical bus going from point A to point B along many points along the way. So what you would do is, first of all, don't fill the bus with as many passengers as you would do before. Right? As earlier, if you had a 60-seater bus, you would put 80 people in it. But now, if you have a 60-seater bus, you ensure that no more than 10 people go in that bus, so that the physical distance between passengers can be maintained. Right? Then you ensure that people who take the buses are tested. So you increase your test rate among bus passengers. You do the testing at bus stands and bus stops and so on, right? So you try to get greater data of the risk of spread among these people. Now, you would reduce the number of people who would come into a bus stand, for example. That's extremely, looks very challenging to do, but it's not as hard to do because a bus stand has an entry and an exit. You close all the unnecessary and informal entries and exits and ensure that people come in only to the formal entries and go out to the formal exits, and ensure that only a certain number of people come into the bus stand. So you will have to draw boxes to maintain queues and all of this. Now, you could say that, we are Indians, we don't like to stand in queues. But look, this is not a normal time in India, right? These are extraordinary times. And if our livelihood depends on standing in queues and behaving ourselves by not spitting in the open and maintaining hand hygiene, then we've got to insist that this is the social norm, right? This is not even a matter of choice now. It's a matter of survival. So queuing, maintaining social distance, physical distance, ensuring that places are not overcrowded, this requires a systematic approach. Now, the good news is this can be done. It's not as hard to do as it appears to be. And getting people in public transport also allows us to concentrate testing among people who are prone to this risk. So all of the moves that we have to relax the lockdown have to be tied with a test, trace, isolate strategy, right? Testing the people at risk, doing contact tracing either through apps or through physical paper forms, and then isolating the people who we think are at risk. The faster we do test, trace, and isolate, the better we'll be able to do in containing the outbreak.
Okay, all right. So, Nitin, I just want to zoom out a little bit and think about what a coherent national reopening strategy might look like, right? One of the most interesting things that I've observed over the last week was the fact that state governments and the union government don't necessarily seem to be on the same page about a lot of the measures that are being proposed. For example, on Saturday, we saw that Karnataka initially said it was going to go along with the MHA's guidelines and reopen IT services starting on Monday. But then almost immediately there was a walkback that happened within the same day itself, where Karnataka said that, no, we're not going to go ahead with that. So clearly there's some kind of lack of coordination between the union and the states in terms of doing this. So I want to ask you, how do you think that a national reopening strategy should actually look like? How do you divide up the responsibilities? And how exactly should states go about implementing this calibrated reopening that we're suggesting?
What I would say is that the national reopening strategy is not the national reopening strategy. In other words, there is no one-size-fits-all kind of a strategy in terms of the specific things that you would do or not do, specific times you would tighten and relax. What we have is a massive, decentralized, calibrated strategy which therefore adds up to a national strategy. So therefore, the national strategy is to decentralize, allow states the prerogative to decide what to do, set a broad set of norms on what they can do and what they cannot do, right? And when they can tighten, when they can loosen, what are the conditions. And then the union government should provide information, technology, capacity, coordination. These are the kind of functions which the union government should provide and help in the interstate coordination and in the international coordination. So, for example, when you have to close airports or where to close railway stations, these are union government subjects. So the union government has to make these calls in consultation with the states. But the states themselves are the best judges of economic activity within their boundaries. But even then, one state in India is like a European country, right? Karnataka is probably as large as Germany. So you can't say that all parts of Germany have the same kind of a risk profile, it differs. So Karnataka has multiple districts, and within districts there are different zones and areas, and you have to be alive to the local variations in economic patterns, demographics, population, occupations, and so on, and travel and so on. So although the states are the best implementation agents, the level of granularity you need is district or sub-district level, ward level even. So we have seen, for example, in Bangalore, in Chennai, and some other places, that the municipality has declared certain wards or certain, small neighborhoods within wards as containment zones. I think that's the right way to do it, because you can contain and isolate the outbreak within small geographic units. If you are confident that you can contain it within the smallest geographical unit, you should do it at that level. So you could say nobody gets in and out of this containment zone, and you're containing everything there, and let the rest of the areas function to levels of normality depending on the risk, right? So that, I think, is your national reopening strategy. There is no national level thing. So what MHA has done, for example, has said that these are the guidelines. If you want to be more stringent than this, you can, but you can't be more relaxed than this. Now, that's a step forward, but I think it's only a half a step forward, because I think what we need is the ability for states to relax controls as well. Because different states are at different levels of the pandemic. Because a state which has seen a pandemic through, at least the first wave of it, should not now be making unnecessary sacrifices in terms of keeping its economy and life activity closed, just because there's another state which is just seeing an outbreak right now. Remember, the states could be as far away as 2,000 kilometers from each other, right? And if interstate transport is shut down, international transport is shut down, at least state-level activity can take place. We have to be very alive to the fact that economic activity is the lifeblood of people. We don't want to be in a situation where a lot more people suffer and die because of the lockdown than because of the pandemic itself. A life is a life. I mean, why would it matter more if people died because of pandemic or because of the economic shutdown, right, of the lockdown? So we've got to be alive to the fact that livelihoods depend on the normal functioning of the economy and society, and we should do as much as we can to get that part up and running.
All right. Thank you so much, Nitin. And thank you, Shambhavi. So, listeners, we have a policy advisory on what a national reopening strategy should look like up on our website. We'll be putting a link in the description, and we'd absolutely love to hear what you think about it. So go over to our website, take a look. If you have any questions about about our national reopening strategy, any comments, please let us know. Thank you both so much for joining me, and thank you for listening to All Things Policy.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Welcome to Peak Planet, a new podcast where we delve into the fallouts of the growth path that we and indeed much of the world has chosen. Sustainable growth is the buzzword. Until we nail that down, we need to ensure that we keep our population healthy and also have the resources for our increasingly urban lifestyles. I'm Karthik Ganesan, a researcher at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, a Delhi-based policy research institute where for almost a decade we've been trying to explain and change the use, reuse and misuse of our resources. In the first season of Peak Planet, we take up air pollution, public enemy number one and an invisible one at that. Increasingly, the most important risk factor for adverse health outcomes, air pollution has become the most unwanted byproduct for an aggressively growing economy. Over 4 episodes, we find out how prepared our systems are to deal with this crisis. You can catch the entire first season of Peak Planet out now on the IVM Podcasts app or website, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Sachin Tendulkar, Virat Kohli, Don Bradman, and now Cyrus Brocha. Okay, probably not in the right company. I mean, Don Bradman is Australian. But it's called Cyrus Says, a wonderful show about everything. Find the show on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts.